Welcome all to Hope for Creation's series of webinars for congregational green teams. We're very excited to have you with us today for this, our fifth in our series of opportunities for congregations to learn about how to care for the planet and care for creation through their own work as a congregation. My name's Joan Hawkshurst, and I am the coordinator for Hope for Creation, and I'm delighted to welcome you all today for a great opportunity to learn from a couple of congregations here in the Kalamazoo area who have embarked on the path of putting solar panels on their buildings. It seemed only fitting, since we are today appreciating the power of the sun, to begin with a brief poem. And I invite you to listen as I share. Let your light shine. As the sun rises, Lord, let your light shine on me. Destroy the darkness about me. Scatter the darkness before me. Disperse the darkness behind me. Dispel the darkness within me. Let your light shine on me. As the sun rises, Lord, let your light shine on me. The warmth of your presence, the brightness of your love, the radiance of your joy, the shining of your hope. Let your light shine on me. As the sun rises, Lord, let your light shine on me. Your light to guide, your light to lead, your light to direct, your light to brighten. Let your light shine on me. Appropriately enough, that's from a collection called Power Lines, Celtic Prayers About Work by David Adam. And today we really will be talking about the power of the sun and how the sun can work for us. We're going to hear from two congregations, Westminster Presbyterian Church in Portage, and then People's Church, Unitarian Universalist congregation in Kalamazoo. The Westminster Presbyterian Church folks actually pre-recorded their comments, and so for the next few minutes we'll hear from their pastor and several congregants about their process of putting solar panels on their roof.
My name is Eileen Best. I'm a member of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Portage, and also a member of the Hope for Creation team that is sponsoring this event. We would like to tell you the story of how our church went through the process of deciding to put solar panels on our church roof. Our green team, which is a really active group in our church and has been working for several years on trying to think of different ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint and care for creation. Has been talking about the idea of putting solar panels on. We felt that it was something really concrete that we could do that would really make a difference for our world. I attended an event sponsored by another organization. I'm not even sure who it was now, and met a young man named Connor from the company called Helios. And after the presentation, I went up and talked to him about the possibility of putting solar panels on our church roof. He was very helpful, said that he would come and answer all of our questions, and gave us lots of really good information about how his company worked and how the process would work. So we set up a meeting with our green team members and also many of our buildings and grounds people who we knew would be very interested in sort of the nuts and bolts of how this worked. So we did this, had a wonderful meeting. Connor came with his dad, Sam, and they answered all of our questions very thoroughly. Most of them were over my head, and as far as the technical part of all this, but our buildings and grounds people were quite impressed and thought it was a really good idea, especially when we found out that there wasn't any upfront cost. That really added a lot to our consideration. I'd like to pass this over now to one of our Green Team members, Anne, who will talk about more about solar panels. Anne?
Thanks, Eileen. Yes, my name is Anne Cervencic, and I'm a member of Westminster Presbyterian Church and very excited to be on the Green Team. Very excited to be in a church that is working toward climate change justice and trying to get some remedies in place. And I just wanted to talk quickly about why should a church consider installing and using solar energy? So we have to think, how can our church play a role in improving the world around us? Climate change affects all of us, and many faith communities want to be good environmental stewards. Faith communities such as churches, temples, mosques, and synagogues can be instrumental in showing what can be done to improve the well-being of their communities. And one of the more immediate ways to create an increasingly sustainable, energy-efficient environment is to install renewable energy sources like solar power systems to our building roofs and properties. In addition to fostering a more green-centric community, renewable energy for churches and other places of worship can also lower the cost of keeping lights on, of heating, and of cooling the buildings that they gather in, and also the buildings that they make available to the community for community outreach availability. There are countless small steps that we are told to take to minimize our impact on the environment and to lower our utility bill. Things like turning off the lights, don't let the water run excessively, unplug equipment when it's not in use, but those small tasks don't necessarily equate to a significantly cheaper monthly power bill. If we want to make a big impact on our building's financial stability while increasing energy efficiency, then solar power for churches can be a really effective way to make a meaningful change. Most congregations can cut energy costs by up to 30% by investing strategically in efficient equipment and facility upgrades and maintenance. 1 degree up in the summer or down in the winter can save you 1.5% on your energy bills. If America's houses of worship can cut energy use by 10%, they will save $315 million. That's nationwide per year. It's pretty staggering. If America's houses of worship can cut their energy use by 10%, they will save 2 billion kilowatts. Okay, and that energy would be available without any additional cost or any energy pollution. It's basically free energy with no negatives attached to it. If America's houses of worship cut energy use by 10%, 1 million tons of greenhouse gases would be prevented. And that right there is just a few of the facts why churches really should be considering moving to solar power as their energy usage. There might not exist another institution that is better able to reach a community more effectively than a church. Faith communities have been at the forefront of social activism throughout history, and faith communities can provide the most active outreach in today's culture as well. Members of a congregation come to their houses of worship to learn about their place in the world, about themselves, to feel connected to God and each other, and also to reach out to the community around them to share their values and their beliefs. Increasingly, we are realizing that there are few global systems more important to humanity's well-being than the environment. Installing a solar power system for your church allows you to contribute meaningful impact to the lives of an authentic community that is dedicated to making the world truly a better place. Across the country, churches, synagogues, temples, and mosques have become increasingly conscious of their moral obligation to care for the environment. Many have quit using styrofoam cups when they serve their coffee, have planted vegetable gardens, and have switched out incandescent bulbs for compact fluorescents or LEDs. And now they are stepping up their environmental activism by investing in renewable energy, particularly solar panels. But the speed with which they acquire and install solar panels has much to do with economics. There are an estimated 350,000 religious congregations in the U.S., and the median congregation with fewer than 75 active participants can struggle to make do. Now, an increasing number of those churches are joining forces and investigating how to challenge state restrictions and economic obstacles for the cause of climate justice. Susanna Tuttle, the director of North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, said that, quote, churches are moving toward renewable energy as a justice issue, and they want to consume and produce clean energy, unquote. If churches could make use of innovative financing ideas, they could provide a wonderful example of climate consciousness to the community around them. Faith communities are commanded to lead the way in issues of social justice, and by leading the way in solar energy solutions, they can help lead the way into a sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I hadn't heard all of that stuff before, so it was good to hear it. I'm Reverend Jerry Duggins. I'm one of the pastors at Westminster Presbyterian Church. Been there for 21 years now, and been a delightful congregation to work with, especially on environmental issues. I want to go back a little bit before. I'm going to share a little of the history of how we came to have solar panels, but I want to go back before the time we talked about it. So it was over 5 years ago that Westminster decided it wanted to become what we call in the Presbyterian Church an earth care congregation. It's a designation that's certified by the denomination. Congregations who want to do this engage in a number of actions and in a variety of areas. They look at ways the church can be greener in its building and use and maintenance, what sort of materials we use in fellowship events, and talked about the styrofoam that we've stopped using. We serve up fair trade coffee at our fellowship events, things along those lines. We're conscious to reference earth care ideas in our liturgy, worship services, in our preaching. We sponsor an annual art festival celebrating the earth and raising awareness of environmental issues. And we have a committee that Eileen referred to, the Green Team, which looks for ways to keep the issues before the congregation and to implement earth-friendly ideas. I start our story here because most churches don't just start with the question, should we put solar panels on our church? More often than not, the question grows out of an ongoing concern for the earth that already has an institutional structure and core values that predisposes the congregation to a positive response. In other words, getting solar panels for us was part of a more general effort at energy conservation and environmental advocacy. I won't say that your congregation's commitment to earth care can't begin with solar panels, but I'd encourage you to make it part of a broader effort. I think you heard in what Anne had to say that environmental concern is part of the culture of our congregation, and that will predispose you to really look at this seriously. So a little bit more about the solar panels. After taking on a number of projects and campaigns, as Eileen said, our Green Team set a goal for themselves about 2 years ago for getting the church to look into the possibility of installing solar panels. And you heard the story of her encounter with Connor and what they did there. They did quite a bit of research, and after doing that and going to our Building and Grounds Committee, it came to our governing board, who also being impressed with what was presented, made a fairly easy decision. Our timing actually worked out pretty well. We managed to get in on an arrangement with the energy provider that was phasing out at the end of 1919. There are other programs out there now, but the financial payback is not quite as good. Here's how our deal worked. Helios would install the panels, own them, and maintain them in exchange for payments from the church to Helios, based loosely on the energy generated by the panels. So the payment would be higher in the summer, lower in the winter. Meanwhile, consumers, the energy provider, would credit the church at the going rate for the electricity that was provided. This is called a net metering arrangement and sadly is no longer available. For new installations, the utility pays at below the market rate, though I think installers are able to structure agreements for churches to continue to break even on the utility costs. Part of the beauty of these arrangements is that it's possible for installers to make money, for churches to save or at least break even on their utility costs. And this is the best part, replace fossil fuel generated energy with renewable energy sources. So as I said, the committee did the background research and approached our governing board with the request to look into it. Task force was quickly set up. We met with a contractor who was, as Eileen already said, very helpful regarding explaining the nuts and bolts and quite responsive to our questions. The contract itself had a little back and forth before being finalized. We had a lawyer look it over, and it's complex enough that I would recommend others to do the same. But in the end, it was not a difficult decision. We could install panels without any cost to the church, potentially save on utility costs, and live out our commitment to earth care by using renewable energy, clean energy. And even though people don't go around looking at roofs so much, it says something positive about the church that we want the community to know. I'd like to say that everything we'd hoped for has happened, but sadly the pandemic has pushed back the day when we'll know what the payoff actually is. Our utility usage has plummeted, not necessarily a bad thing. So the projections originally made, they're just not valid right now. We won't know for another year or so what the result will be. But we do know that the panels are adding renewable energy to the grid, and someone is using that even if we aren't. So thanks for listening, and I'm going to ask if Eileen has anything further she would like to add, and then Francis.
Thank you, Jerry. It was a really good summary. Now I'm going to turn it over to Francis, another member of our Green Team.
And I'd like to speak to you about the church's involvement in the local community. It was reported several years ago in the U.S. Energy Information Administration report that about 1/3 of the U.S. households struggle to pay their utility bills. To make up the cost of electricity, about 20% forego necessities like food and medicine, and about 11% keep their thermostats at an unsafe temperature. Low-income families are hit the hardest, spending a larger share of their income to power homes that are much older and poorly insulated. Today, in low-income neighborhoods, these statistics may be higher. The vast majority of community solar subscribers have been businesses, universities, governmental agencies, and higher earning households, all of which can pay the steep fees or meet the financial requirements. Meanwhile, those who could benefit most from access to renewable energy are the low-income families. About 44% of the U.S. total fall into this income category. The problem many low-income families face is the high cost of installation of solar panels, equipment, and maintenance. Local governments might be able to ease the burden by issuing a very variety of mandates, financial incentives, eliminating income and credit score checks, and developing pilot programs to make it easier for low-income families to access shared solar. Faith-based groups have long inspired justice-driven values. With the rising concern over climate change, religious missions not only entail addressing social and economic inequality, but also environmental injustice. One way for local churches to become involved is to pool their resources together in acquiring unused vacant land in low-income areas to provide solar gardens and bring renewable energy to low-income families. For a low monthly fee, families could benefit from the electricity generated, which would cost less than the price they would normally pay for their electric. Because the cost of solar panels and equipment can be expensive, a local cooperative alliance could help leverage the buying power of multiple churches to help lower the cost. This organization would allow churches, schools, and other nonprofits to negotiate and contract for solar equipment in bulk instead of churches dealing with solar providers. Churches that have already installed solar panels and with some with energy systems can share valuable information to other churches thinking about going solar. They also can provide charging stations for electric vehicles to supply emergency electricity when the power goes out, where residents can take advantage and recharge their cell phones and refrigerate medications. As we move away from fossil fuels toward renewable energy sources, churches can lead by their stewardship and take a leadership role to address the environmental injustices in low-income communities. Thank you.
Everyone for listening to our story of Westminster Presbyterian Church and our experience of putting solar panels on our roof. And if you have questions or would like to talk to us, feel free to contact us with those questions. Thank you.
Oops. So thank you so much to Anne and Eileen and Reverend Sherry and Francis for that recorded set of comments. The good news is that we have 3 of the 4 of them with us on today's call. So after the next presentation from People's Church, we'll invite all of the folks who are here with us today to answer questions and to share any closing comments. So I forgot to mention up front that we actually do have several of the folks you just saw on the recording with us today. I also forgot to mention that we'd be delighted for people to post comments and questions in the Facebook Live chat as we go along today. I see some of that happening. And again, once we finish with the presentations, we'll offer the opportunity for our panelists today to take your questions. So with that being said, I'm happy to turn the floor over now to a representative of the People's Church to talk about their experience. And I'll remind him to unmute before he gets started.
I was just talking to myself, I guess. Thanks, Joan. I'm Tom Hackley from People's Unitarian Universalist Church in Kalamazoo. We appreciate the invitation to share our story with you today. Our experience with solar panels pretty much parallels that of Westminster in many ways. So I don't want to duplicate their presentation. What I'd like to do instead is to explain a path that we're on that we hope will lead us to net zero carbon emissions by 2030. The Unitarian Universalist Association has a program known as Green Sanctuary, which enables member churches to become certified as Green Sanctuary congregations by going through a process and meeting various objectives, much like the Earth Care congregations of the Presbyterian denomination. People's Church had become certified in 2015, and our path towards solar began then. But because of costs and the need to retire a building debt first, the notion was put on hold. In 2018, I was a new member of People's Church, and I joined the Green Sanctuary Committee. My previous congregation, the Berrien Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in St. Joseph, also had a Green Sanctuary Committee. And among other activities, we had installed a solar array in 2015. So I expressed my interest in pursuing that goal at People's. This was met with interest, and I was encouraged to explore the idea further. What I did instead was to come back to the next meeting with a bigger goal, that we become carbon neutral by 2030. I expected to run into resistance, but again was encouraged. And honestly, I was not prepared to step onto a greased slope, but People's was ready to roll. So I've been sliding downhill with them ever since. The pictures that you see there obviously are solar panels on the right, but the building the picture on the left, you're looking at from the southern view. And the closest portion of it to us is the new addition, which was put on in 2012. The older part of the building was built in the 1960s. They have separate heating plants. So the new portion is a forced air system with air conditioning. The old portion is a hot water boiler with radiators. The roof of the new section is where we installed the solar panels, and you'll note that it slopes off so towards the east a little bit. It's not exactly the ideal orientation for solar panels, but it's close enough. And so the Helios Solar, who also installed ours, said that the way they evaluated these was the cost effectiveness of it, and that it would cost us more to put structures up in order to hold the panels in the perfect condition, and that would reduce our return on investment. So we're happy to do it this way. It lends itself to better, easier maintenance and less potential wind damage and that sort of thing. So the next slide will tell us our story so far along this journey. And it diverges. So let's start with our initial portion. We formed a net zero task force of the Green Sanctuary Committee. That was made up of members who were also on other committees. So we had two people from the Building and Grounds. We had one from the Finance Committee. And we had, I think 4 of us were members of the Green Sanctuary Committee as well. I was away during a part of that winter, so it wasn't until spring that we sort of got organized, had some discussions, and kind of sought resources. And that was where we learned of Westminster's plans. So I contacted Helios and began a discussion with Connor and Sam Fields. That led to a presentation that was open to members of the church, but we specifically invited the key committee members from Building and Grounds, Finance, Green Sanctuary, and the Board of Directors. Eventually, after vetting it with all those committees, the board approved the concept, and a couple of people were assigned to work on developing a contract. That was eventually approved in, I think, December, just a year ago, that our contract was approved. And at that point, with a signed contract, Helios was able to order the panels and the other materials and get started on the system. And we just made it under the wire there there was a change in January of the net metering program and some of the rebates that were available. So we got there just in time to get the full tax and rebate advantages. 6 months later, June 2nd, the work was completed and the system was commissioned. And by commissioning, they mean tested and functioning properly. So we've been in operation for a little more than 6 months now. And I did 6-month kind of numbers on it, and they're very encouraging. So over those 6 months, from June through November, we produced 16,000 plus kilowatt hours, which is the equivalent of 71% of our 2019 consumption during that same period. We obviously can't compare with 2020 because we haven't been in the building since March. That 16,000 kilowatt hours is worth about $2,100 in value. Now, most of that money is going to Helios to pay for our panels, but we're happy to be able to reduce our carbon impact by that much. So then I went in and with some figures that I had gained from Consumers Energy and some other sources, did an interpolation of what our annual production will be. 53% is in the 6 months that we've been in operation, June through December. 47% is in the months December through May. So when we put all that together, we got an annual projection of in excess of 30,000 kilowatt hours, which is more than 50% of our 2019 consumption. This makes us very happy. We were expecting something more in the neighborhood of 35 to 40%. And it may turn out that way, of course, but you can never tell by just doing a theoretical projection, but hopefully we'll be there. So parallel to the solar progress, we began work on our net zero program. In September of 2019, a couple of us went to a net zero building conference in Detroit that was just full of incredible ideas and a lot of resources. We came back, followed it up, and a lot of them turned into dead ends. Programs that looked like they were good, had strings attached. One, the Consumers Zero Net Energy pilot project, either they gave up on us or they just stopped doing business. We don't know, but we probably were too small a project, and we were probably going to take too long for them to get the public relations value out of it. So we haven't heard from them in a while. We tried to get an energy audit. We had some folks out, they took a look at this place. We were anticipating them to come back to us with some solid numbers about what we should do and how much it would save us. They came back to us and told us that for $11,000, they could do that for us. So at this point, we decided we're on our own. We're not going with any of these people. It's a lot easier for us to finance through our own endowment fund. We'll just, we can figure out our own energy audit and we'll move on. So we started doing some more stuff. We implemented a few things. We insulated our water distribution pipes and the heating system. They had never been insulated, and there's, several hundred feet of pipe that was just radiating heat into the ceiling above the hallways. We turned off a couple of electrical devices that weren't providing us much of a benefit and figured out how to come up with other ways of doing that. And we proceeded to develop a 10-year phased plan and a budget for doing what we were pretty sure we were going to need to do in order to get to our net zero result. We put together a 1-year budget proposal for our board. And in the winter months of 2020, we installed high efficiency water pumps in our water distribution system. And things were looking good. We're waiting for our annual meeting to get a new budget approved and be ready to get on to our projects when the pandemic hit. We closed the church, the annual meeting was postponed, and the board decided to go with a continuation budget until they had some idea of what kind of impact the pandemic was going to have on us. So, there's been still a lot of talk and a lot of exploration, but it wasn't until October when the board came back together and reviewed the budget situation and approved an amended budget for the current fiscal year, which gave us some of our budget back, a little bit more than half. So we've gotten back into business here. We've done a heat loss analysis, which I'll share with you in a minute. And since we have an empty building, we realized that we could actually do a laboratory testing of some of these things in there. So we've taken a couple of rooms that are identical, and we've calibrated our recording thermostats in both of the rooms, gotten them so that they're at exactly the same temperature. And next week, we're going to start doing some stuff experimentally to see what happens. And we'll just, hopefully the weather will be cold, and that'll give us some good extremes to test with, and we'll be able to prove whether our theoretical analysis on the heat loss is accurate. So I think we can go to the next slide, Joan. Back to the solar here. This is our 6 months of month-by-month energy production. And as you can see, it's just on the June production of 4,173. But over those 6 months, it was in excess of 16,000 kilowatt hours. And you can see how month by month, it's gotten a little bit less as the sun gets lower in the sky, as weather gets a little bit cloudier. And the last one, which was not included in the 16,000, is December, which looks like it's probably going to be our lowest month, unless we have some nice sunny days the rest of the way. But that's to be expected. And we know that in the beginning in January, we're going to start having more sunny days, and the sun's going to be rising in the sky. Hallelujah for that. Mm-hmm. And we should be back in business pretty soon as far as pumping out those electrons, to some of which go to the grid and some of which go into our building. We can go to the next slide, Joan. This shows what's happened to our electric and gas consumption. And really only the first 3 columns on the left are valid. The rest of 2020 has been during the pandemic with an empty church building, or almost empty. But, so the green column is 2020. And you can see by comparison to previous years that we've had a significant, a recognizable reduction in our electric use based on some of the things that we did last fall. Turning off our roof eave heating system, which hadn't done any good anyway, and turning off the continuous vent in the bathroom, which was intended to keep the sewer gases from building up in there. And instead, our genius maintenance member of the Building and Grounds Committee said, well, let's just pour some mineral oil on top of the water in the floor trap so it doesn't evaporate, and that should keep the gas from coming back up. So instead of running the fan continuously 24/7, 365 days a year, it's not running at all anymore. It was sucking heat out of the building, and it was using electricity. So those two things have reduced our electric. Probably some of the work we did on the water distribution pipes, insulating them, also helped on the electric, because there's less of a load on the distribution system as well. If you go down to the lower graph, that's the gas usage. And again, significant reductions. Well, what's that? Just insulating those the hot water pipes that are circulating. That's the only change that we made until late March, when we put in the new efficient pumps to circulate the water. So in both gas and electric, we've seen measurable reductions in our electricity use and our gas use from fairly small things. And I just would encourage any congregation or homeowner who's looking to save on their carbon emissions or their expenditures, be a sleuth, go around, figure out where things are disappearing. There are holes in your house. There are vents that are running that don't need to be running. And you know, look around, pay attention to those things that you've never noticed before, because they're wasting energy. So Joan, you can go to the next slide. This is the 10-year plan, and it really is a 5-year, year-by-year plan, and then a 5-year bulk sort of what comes next. We looked at a number of things in terms of our heating system. We looked at the solar panels, and we looked at the envelope of the building, and the envelope being windows, roof and ceilings, walls, and the foundation. And then we also looked at replacing our natural gas heating system, because that's, of course, is carbon you can't escape unless you go all electric. So just try to project across where it would make sense for us to do what things in what years. And I'll show you with the heat loss calculations that we've kind of concluded that insulating the ceilings now doesn't make sense, because we've got fairly decent insulation in there. So we'll likely wait until our roof is ready for replacement, and then we will add insulation on top of the roof and then new roofing on top of it. So we kind of changed our priorities around based on the heat loss analysis. But the roof is going to be an expensive thing, and at that time, doing insulation will make perfect sense. So and then of course replacing our natural gas boiler with a heat pump, most likely, is going to be another big expense, and that's a relatively new and now pretty efficient system, so we're not going to change it out early, but we are going to try to get our walls and windows fixed. So if you go to the next slide, Joan, this is the heat loss calculations, and I don't even encourage any of you to look closely at this, because it'll start boggling your mind. I went through each of the windows, walls, and ceiling elements of our building envelope, calculated by figuring out what was there now, what the R value was, then figured out how much heat was being lost through those places by measuring the square footage. This is just on one room. And then calculated what the annual cost in terms of energy was, and then did some hypotheticals with what other things we could do there to stop that heat loss, calculated those R values, extended them across, and eventually came down with what I think is maybe a reasonable cost of about $3,000 a room, or somewhere around $54,000 for our entire old section of our building. And that would give us a savings of about $3,000 a year, I think, which ends up being a return on investment of more than 4%. Well, 4% is better than we're getting in return on it from our endowment fund right now. So I think that's probably going to be an easy sell when it comes down to it. Well, maybe not easy, but it'll at least be easier than if we weren't getting any benefit at all. So that's the end. I hope to come back here in 10 years. I hope I'm still here in 10 years, and then I can come back and tell you we've had a great success to our 10-year plan. Thank you. And I'm going to hang around for questions.
Thank you so much, Tom, and all of our panelists. And we've got a bunch of questions that have come in. So I wanted to super quickly just thank all of you for being here and give a brief plug. So both People's Church and Westminster Presbyterian Church are part of Hope for Creation, and we would love to welcome other congregations to join us in our efforts. We're an interfaith group of congregations in Kalamazoo and Southwest Michigan. Our goals are to support congregations who are trying to do things like what you've heard today from Westminster and Peoples. We also do collective advocacy work around environmental justice and climate change issues in our area. And I just wanted to put in a little plug for, if you're here today to learn about solar, we hope you'll join us for other Congregational Green Team opportunities to learn about other ways that you can be part of this collaborative work. And also just to remind folks that we do have a Facebook page where we share information and resources. And with that, I will stop talking, except to start sharing some of the questions that have come in through the chat. And we're really happy to have folks continue to post questions in the Facebook. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see the folks who are on here with us in the Zoom call today. So thanks to all of you. And here are some of the questions that have come in, and hopefully everybody's unmuted now and we'll have you chime in with answers. So the first question was from Ben, and he wanted to know from somebody from Westminster whether before the pandemic hit, did you find that the reduction in your electric bill offset the leasing costs you were paying?
Boy, that's a good question. We didn't actually have the panels put on until November of 2019, but we weren't seeing data from it until May. So the pandemic was in full swing. We are currently producing more electricity than we're using, which means we have a credit with consumer. The way Helios has set it up is that they try to set it up so that you're not getting all of your energy from the panels.
Great. So
I'm not sure what else to say.
Maybe I could address that.
Sure.
The payments to Helios are based on the amount of energy that's produced. And two things happen to that energy. One is you use it yourself, which means you got a lower electric bill, or you sell it back to consumers, in which case you get a credit. The amount that consumers will give you on the credit is more than we pay Helios by a little bit. And it's guaranteed in the contract. And the amount that what we use in our building is also more expensive than what we pay Helios for if we had bought it from consumers. So it's hard to compare them accurately because the bills come in on the 15th, but the Helios charges us quarterly on the first of the month, and it's very confusing. And then there's a separate bill or separate accounting from net metering at consumers as well. So it's a massive numbers that are very hard to work their way through. But in the end, we're making out a little bit better than we would have without the panels.
Yeah. We have a slightly different arrangement. All of our energy goes to consumers, and they supply all of our electricity, and they credit us the amount that was generated. So, and then we pay Helios a certain amount that's negotiated, but it's in the contract that if we end up paying more money for the electricity that was generated than we paid to Helios, they'll credit us the next year. So we're never out money with Helios. And in 5 or 6 years, our hope is to purchase the panels, and then it's all money that benefits us. It actually reduces our bill quite a bit.
Great. So there's a lot of love in the comments and the chat on Facebook Live too. There's love for the community garden idea. There's love for the net zero 10-year plan. So I just want all of our speakers to know that all of your comments have been very much appreciated today. Another question came in from Kathy, and she asked, when you say that the installers maintain your panels, what exactly does that mean? She talked about shade and snow on the panels and who cleans the snow off in the winter, some maintenance issues you might be able to address. I know it's early in both of your experiences, but any thoughts on that?
I'll tell you, we had a roof leak that ended up not being related to the panels themselves, but they were on the part of the roof that the panels were on, and Helios came and they repaired the leak at their expense. So that sort of thing is what they mean by maintaining. If there's a panel that's damaged, because Helios owns them, they pay for they pay for any work that's done on them, and they come out, I think, on an annual basis and check them. They are monitored constantly, so you can see whether they're working or not. And we can monitor that, and Helios is also monitoring it.
One of the concerns that came up with our board when it was being considered was who pays the insurance on it. And really it's, Helios owns it. They pay for insurance on their panels and including liability on our building. So they're taking care of it to get the most out of it that they can. And we were quite happy with all of that, because who wants to go up there and mess with something you don't know anything about? Right.
Here's a question for the Westminster folks, and then I have one for the people's person. This one is from Sabelle. She wondered if any of your congregants at Westminster have seen the success of panels on your building and have then chosen to make the decision to install solar panels on their homes. Is that something that you observed?
I'm not aware of anybody. I know Eileen looked into that for their home, and they have too much shade. So, my wife in the background here is telling me that there's another couple that are planning to do solar panels on their home. So yeah, some, but not a lot right at this moment.
Great. And the People's Church question was, I think one of Tom's charts mentioned installing metal roofing to support additional solar panels, and they wanted to know whether that was necessary or more about that need to change the roof to accommodate more panels.
It's not necessary, but the metal roof is the preferred roof to work with, because it's clamped in place on the vertical fins that are on the roof, so you don't penetrate the roof. There's no likelihood of putting a hole in it. So we just, if you're going to have to pay for some roofing material anyway, why not get the one that's going to last for the lifetime of your oldest or your youngest member in your church? So
great. Thank you. Well, we are coming to the end of our hour here together today, and I do want to take one more opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to all of the folks from Westminster Presbyterian Church and People's Church who have volunteered not only today to be with us, but I know what a labor of love it must have been for both of your congregations to go through all of the processes, do all of the research, take all the time and energy that it did to get solar panels up on your buildings and running, and then to become the evangelists to the rest of us as we in other congregations consider following in your lead. So I just want to express deep gratitude to all of you. And I wanted to give you each, if you want, an opportunity to send our audience away with anything that we didn't cover or any thoughts or suggestions you want to make sure we get into the last minute or two of our time together today. So anyone who wants, take it away for just a minute or two.
Well, I will say, if there are any other questions that are on there, Joan, forward them to me. I'd be happy to answer anything. And if there are people from other congregations in the Kalamazoo area who would like to talk about this or would like to have a presentation or anything along those lines, I am an evangelist. I'm a true believer, and and I'd be happy to spend some time with them. So just give a shout out to us.
I think folks might not be aware, but we both worked with Helios, but there are other solar panel installers. You're certainly not committed to use Helios, although they've been great to work with. But shop around. I would shop around. That's all I got. Anne, Francis, or Eileen?
Well, I just, I don't know much about the technical end of this. And the thing that excites me about communities of faith really, putting their foot forward and getting solar technology is what you can do with that solar technology after the 5 years have passed and you have purchased the panels, the ways that you can minister to the community around you to provide solar charging stations for electric cars, to provide a safe space to go if the electric grid goes down and people need medications refrigerated or any of, cell phones charged, any of that kind of thing. That's what's exciting to me. I would just say we need to continue thinking an additional 5 years into the future of what we can do with this gift that we have.
Sure.
Thank you, Jen, for giving us this opportunity. It's been great to share between the two congregations and a lot of really good information here. Thanks.
Yeah, and I will let you all know that there are more folks thanking you on the Facebook chat. So again, with deep gratitude from Hope for Creation, the interfaith convening of congregations in Kalamazoo and Southwest Michigan who are working together to address climate change and environmental injustice. We appreciate all of you being with us today. If you reach Hope for Creation through Facebook or our website or email, I will make sure that we get any further questions to our panel of experts today. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thanks so much for being with us. Take care, all.
Thanks, Joan.